information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production.
For WIN, I'm Joanne Powers. Legislation to combat rampant wage theft in California's construction industry passed the state legislature this month with strong majorities in both houses. Assembly Bill 1701 would hold general contractors and their subcontractors jointly liable for unpaid wages, all the way down the line. If signed by Governor Jerry Brown, which seems likely, it will go into effect at the end of the year. Cesar Diaz, legislative and political director of the California State Building and Construction Trades Council, says wage theft by subcontractors is common in the industry nationwide.
We believe that the general contractor does have the authority of the entire work site on a variety of different levels, and so they are responsible for hiring subcontractors that fail to pay their workers. This happens routinely on many private construction job sites. They often turn a blind eye because in the end they know they won't be responsible for that subcontractor's actions. And so this bill changes that behavior.
Diaz says AB 1701 will also help combat the common practice of misclassifying construction workers as independent contractors, denying them a wide array of benefits and worker protections. The state's construction industry spent $5 million fighting the legislation.
They said that if you were to pay workers their properly owed wages, that somehow that would increase construction costs, which I think sent a signal to all of us and a lot of the legislators in the Capitol. They're basically admitting that they're not paying workers what they're properly owed, abusing workers, and none of those savings translated into lower housing costs. They all just translated into more profits for the developers themselves. The legislators were not buying those arguments.
The union representing dining service workers at Grinnell College in Iowa has announced a campaign to expand their reach to all 1,200 student workers on campus. Corey McCartan is president of the Union of Grinnell Student Dining Workers.
We really saw the union working well for student workers in food service and thought it was time to bring those benefits to the rest of campus. There's just no real way for workers collectively to have a say in anything that goes on at work. Wages and hours are set unilaterally. We think it's really important to provide that voice, and we think that unions are the best way to do that.
The union has challenged the university to remain neutral throughout the process.
In the past, they've actually stayed pretty neutral, so we're hopeful and optimistic that this time around they'll take that approach and choose democracy over anti-union tactics like we see at Harvard and Yale. But we're prepared for anything, and we think we have strong support in the student body.
Workers Independent News is America's multimedia voice for workers.
We need to make more money. What they're paying us, a greedy corporation, they just want to pay us what they want to pay us, and it's not right.
Support WIN's news mission at workersindependentnews.com. WIN is made possible in part by the OPEIU, the Office and Professional Employees International Union. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for tuning in today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about as we are back after a week away. And it was one of those unscheduled, unplanned, didn't expect to take some time off. But it's, it's one of those things that you just go, had to do it. No choice, no other way of dealing with it other than take some time off. It reminded me of an old John Entwistle song. Go back to the 1960s, I guess. Death is life's way of telling you to slow down. And slow down, we have not been able to do. But last week had to take it. Had a little health scare. Or I forget what they called it. Sub something or other, subventricle tachycardia, something along those lines. Whole bunch of mumbo jumbo along those lines. And basically what happened, I woke up 4:30 in the morning and, to a beating heart, which is a good thing generally, but not at the pace that it was going. I'm going, might be a bad dream. I don't know. And it was just one of these things where for me to go, maybe I should go to the hospital. It's serious. Now I didn't, of course, because I'm a man and I'm kind of stupid. And it took, several hours until like 8:30 till my wife, the one with the good sense, said, you should go, and we're going. And that's really what it was. We're going. It is what it is. Nothing we can really do. So went to the doctors, and by the time we got to the hospital, it was one of these moments where I felt fine. I'm a little tired, but I'm all right. So I walk in, the nurse at the front desk goes, sit down, quick. And I'm going, no, I feel fine. She goes, no, seriously, sit down. So I sit down, and I'm joking with the nurses and talking, and they rush me right into the back. And I'm going, wow, no line, no waiting, and just silence. And I get into a room with like 8 people, and they go, your heart rate is elevated. And I go, well, having 8 people in a room, no kidding. You're starting to make me think this is serious. When they told me what the heart rate was, I was well over 200. And you go, wait a second, I'm normally in the high 60s, low 70s range. That's normal for me. And to have it, over 200, you're going, wow, that's probably not a good thing, is it? And they're like, no, not a good thing. And it had been beating so crazy for so long that evidently I was pumping out, which made the veins a little smaller. And, one of those times where you go, this is important. They shot me with something. Immediately the heart rate went down because evidently for, a brief beat or of a second, they stopped my heart and let it restart. And fortunately, it did restart. And I haven't had any real problems since. But the question is how much lack of sleep, how much stress, how much overwork can you do? And, this is one of those, doctor said, take a couple of days off. You may never have this happen again. It was, an electronic misfire or something. But you might want to just kind of, tap it down a bit. And it really got me thinking this week of all weeks that you've got a Republican-led Congress who's trying to steal health care from people. Because now I have officially become part of the pre-existing conditions club. Whether this ever happens again, whether and the doctor said it's possible, you may never have this ever happen to you again. It was just, a weird kind of little thing. I had been up, generally I'm someone who, I'll stay up, days without sleep often. And, over the weekend I had, I was up probably a lot. Probably got like 6 hours sleep in like 3 days. So I was a little tired. I was a little worn down. And that they're going, that could have been it. I mean, that could have been caused your problem. But it really got me thinking about this whole pre-existing condition thing, because now this is serious. I've never had heart problems. I've never had any real serious health conditions. This now you have to put down on a form. And the insurance that you're going to have to buy in the private market is going to look at this 50-year-old guy. Heart thing, triple, quadruple, 5 times his rate because of who knows, it was, could have happened to anybody. And let's say, tomorrow I lose this job. Let's say tomorrow I'm no health insurance. What happens? I mean, stop and think about this. And this could happen to anyone. And I look at the story that was put out by our friends over at Raging Chicken Press, who pointed out that one of the adjunct professors at Kutztown University, evidently, like me, who knows? You got sick. Things happen. Wasn't there a year, so not covered under the Family Medical Leave Act, probably didn't have enough hours to qualify for the Family Medical Leave Act. So sick, needs surgery. Life-saving surgery. Needs this. Kutztown University, in their infinite wisdom, as Raging Chicken Press reported, fired this person. Sorry, you can't complete your job. We don't want you. So not only does this person have to go through life-saving surgery, they now have no health insurance and no income. Stop and think about that for just a second. And that's what, you start focusing this healthcare debate. And this isn't, we aren't having a debate right now. What we're having is political opportunism and the ability to impose their political will. All of this Graham Cassidy nonsense is about, hey, we made a pledge during the campaign. We're going to repeal and replace. It's all this is about. This isn't about good policy. And what's frustrating to me on so many levels is that, look, it could happen to any one of us at any second. Did I expect it? No. Thank goodness thank goodness to the Affordable Care Act, because we have insurance through there. Thank goodness. As a self-employed small business owner, thank goodness. Because if you don't have the insurance, you don't get the care. Or they're going to hound you till the day you die to pay the bill that you can't afford. And I'll tell you this. While I was on the way to the hospital, and this again is being very fortunate in knowing that I have insurance, the last thing that I was thinking about is, how am I going to pay for this? As I was on the stretcher, on the gurney or whatever it was, while these 8 people were feverishly working around me, the last thing I was thinking about is, can I pay for this? I was more concerned that they kept jabbing me with needles, and I hate needles. The debate right now should not be about which side chalks up a political win. Shouldn't be. It should be on a policy debate, on a policy, how do we insure everyone? How does everyone get coverage regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of, do they have, as now a card-carrying member of the pre-existing conditions club, how do we make sure that people who have pre-existing conditions aren't priced out of insurance? Because at the end of the day, without having that card in your wallet, without having that ability to get care, you're going to die sooner. Now, here's the thing. Now, this is, and I've thought about this a great bit. Let's say I didn't have that card in my wallet. Let's say just for a moment, didn't have it. And I was, sitting on the couch, heart beating probably, 300-400 beats a minute, probably. Because it was painful and it was wow. Because when I went to the hospital, to be honest, it was at over 200 and I didn't even know it. I said, no, I feel fine. You should have been there before. Had I not had that card in my wallet, my wife couldn't have convinced me to go because I said, well, I want to have the money. And had I waited long enough, heart could have exploded because it would have just beat itself right out. This is also part of the huge problem that we have in this country of not getting things taken care of, not pursuing preventative care. So for me this week, again, another one of those moments where as a country, we've got to repel another one of these bad repeal and replace schemes. And I would argue we need to repeal and replace those in Congress who keep ramming this down our throats. Just a thought. Love to hear your thoughts. Are you a member of the Pre-Existing Conditions Club? And if so, what does this repeal and replace mean to you? Going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Propane Jane's going to be here to share some of her thoughts on the weekend's endeavor. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1961. That was the day when Herbert Lee was murdered just outside of Liberty, Mississippi. He was a successful black cotton farmer who became active in efforts to register black voters. Lee had 9 children. He was one of the few area black farmers with a vehicle. This made him very valuable to the voter registration movement. Lee would drive Bob Moses from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee around Amet County to reach unregistered voters. It was dangerous work to register black sharecroppers and farmers in rural Mississippi. Attempts by black residents to gain legal or economic equality were met with threats and violence. On the morning of his murder, Lee had come to the Westbrook Cotton Gin just outside of Liberty to drop off a truckload of cotton. There, he was met by a childhood friend, Mississippi State Representative E.H. Hurst. Hurst came up to the truck and started shouting at Lee. Then he took out a gun and shot Herbert Lee in the head. Witnesses stated that Lee had brandished a tire iron at Hurst. Hurst claimed self-defense. A jury declared the murder was justifiable homicide. Lewis Allen, a black farmer and timber worker, was one who had testified about witnessing the shooting. Later, he recanted his testimony, saying that he had lied about Lee threatening Hurst because he feared for his life. After Allen began to talk about what he actually saw that day, he became the victim of harassment and beatings. Finally, on January 31st, 1964, he too was gunned down in his driveway. No one was ever convicted or even arrested for his murder. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, just a couple of days away. What could possibly happen? You take a couple of days, rejuvenate, take a deep breath, relax, enjoy a little time with the family. What could possibly go wrong in this stable environment in which our politics are being played out? Well, if you watched football yesterday, kind of just the country is losing its ever-loving freaking mind. And here to help us out and work through some of the insanity, our good friend Propane Jane. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So, anything happen yesterday? Anything we may have missed?
You already know what my theory is about when we take breaks.
Anytime I take off, it's almost like the end of the world. It's like the world loses its mind.
It does. I mean, I think it's basically just saying, don't take a break, Rick. That's what it's telling you. That's what the universe is telling you.
I would have loved not to.
I'm glad you're better, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, the doctor claims, one of those one-time things, maybe never happen again. Hopefully it never does, because my wife just nagged me to no end.
That's what she's there for, though.
That's what they said. But here, let's get back to yesterday. Yesterday's big thing. Again, right in front of us, a president who is incapable of just letting something go. Right.
This has been weeks in the making, actually. You know, most of the time when we have these conversations about what Trump is doing, and in particular his character pathology, what everything boils down to is that he holds perpetual grudges. He basically moves from one grudge to the next, and he always feels slighted in some way. And so basically everything he's doing is about vindicating himself, at least in his mind, and amongst his base, in regards to him barking back at his detractors. And so, he switches from Kim Jong-un, who obviously they have this ongoing battle with each other of words. But as well, he's upset with Jamel Hill. And weeks ago she said that he is a white supremacist and he's empowered white supremacists. Now, obviously, this conversation has been going on
from the beginning.
Since the campaign, obviously, and obviously since he was inaugurated. I mean, it's something that is always there in the background. But for whatever reason, and most likely because she is a black female and has a very large platform, and because so many people who consume sports and consume ESPN voted for Trump, they are offended by that, and so then that gets ratcheted up in the right-wing media, and then now Trump, the typical schoolyard bully, has to address it. He can't let this woman, not just a woman, but a black woman, say this about him without him answering to it, even though this has been an ongoing conversation for months and years and decades at this point in his life. So I think he's just not going to let it go because he feels personally slighted, and it's going to lead to him doing things that are obviously very self-sabotaging, like, calling American citizens SOBs on live television.
Yeah, what's up with that? I mean, look, say what you want, but, come on. We're now just, undoing any decorum, any...
Oh, gosh.
I mean, come on.
It's gone. And I'm just thinking about, again, these are people who went ad nauseum about that President Obama put his feet up on the desk and he was wearing his shirt sleeves in the Oval Office and, his suit is the wrong color and just things that they managed to take offense to. And then you have this man, saying these types of things. And this is a party that claims to be, evangelical and claims to be Christian and claims to have all of these family values. I mean, Mike Pence won't even be alone in a room with another woman. But his president, is going around saying SOBs, calling actual women who had children, the B word. So it's very tacky, and I think they're so hypocritical because they're not going to say anything to him because he's on their side.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. What do you say to Trump's response this morning that it has nothing to do with race?
Oh, that's BS. That's BS. I mean, this is he does protest too much as always. I've been talking about this for days on end, like. I have a hard time understanding why people who are racist don't just own it. Like, I mean, what the offense that he is taking is at being called a certain word. It's like the negative connotation that is associated with being called a white supremacist or being called a racist. And he's demanding an apology for being labeled in this way. But at the same time, not addressing any of the actions that he's taken or the deeds that he's done that are making people even say that about him, and that he does have a lifelong history of doing very racist things, of saying very racist things. And so, I mean, he literally settled out of court in 1975 or 1974, whatever year that was, because he was engaging in housing discrimination. So this is more of a deflection. This is more of him not wanting to take responsibility for the things that he's doing that are rubbing people the wrong way and that people are identifying as very toxic, inappropriate things for the President of the United States to be doing and saying.
Are you surprised by the dog whistle that we keep hearing about the NFL players? Because look, the one thing that I argued yesterday is, you took what was the protest of a handful. There were a few people who were taking a knee.
Right.
You took that and you've now magnified it to the point to where, the league had to take a position and owners had to take positions, and you saw owners arm in arm with players, and you saw now now it's right front and center in our discussion. Yet a lot of the things that I've been hearing is, well, you've got these ungrateful millionaires, and you kept hearing this word. And I was reading a New Yorker article this morning that it was their opinion that the ungrateful frame is the new uppity.
Oh, for sure. It is. Because what does that even mean? I mean, essentially what it means when you break it down is, hey, you as a black person have been given this, unique opportunity to play this sport, to make all of this money, to have white people actually accept you by and large to some degree because of the physical talent you have. So how dare you use that platform and that privilege and that money and that success to speak your mind and to speak it differently than all these fans that want to support you in a vacuum. They want to be able to watch sports and watch all of these black men run around and bet on them and make their fantasy football team. But how much do those fans care if that black man in particular, because he's a black man, is however many more times likely to be killed by police when he's unarmed. And then now their fantasy football team is, not to make it petty, but from the standpoint of that individual and that person's life, these people only want to put it in the context of what value they have to this sports team and not what value they have to their families or their communities, and how as black men they are affected by seeing other black men who, yes, aren't as rich as them and who, aren't playing football or some other sport, basketball, whatever, but because they have a black body are being gunned down in the street and the police are getting away with it. And those individuals, no matter how much money they have, still recognize that their money doesn't shield them from racism. And this is what Newt Gingrich doesn't understand. This is what a lot of the white people that are saying this don't understand, is that having money, being of a certain socioeconomic status doesn't shield people of color from the racism that comes just by virtue of looking a certain way, the discrimination that comes with that, the institutionalized oppression that comes with having a certain name that sounds ethnic. These people are not understanding that aspect of it.
Do you think? I got to be honest. I think you're giving them too much credit. They don't understand frame. I don't buy.
No, I really honestly do. Because I've had this conversation with so many people who think that because I've had white people tell me all my life, well, you're different. You're a different black person because you grew up in this neighborhood with us as white people and because you went to school and you have money, so you are a different type of black person. And this frame gets used over and over again that because they see you in their spaces, they think that you can't be subjected. And these are people that I count as friends that I have known all my entire life that think that somehow I don't encounter racism because I am, in a white world, so to speak, and because I didn't grow up in the projects and because my family had money. And so this is a huge misconception that even liberal people, progressives have. Particularly people like Bernie Sanders who think that if you just get free college and you just get some form of economic prosperity, that you no longer can be oppressed, that you are no longer a subject of institutionalized racism, and that's just not reality. But I do think that's how most of America thinks it.
Yeah, I'm not about to push back too much, but does Bernie really believe that? Because look, I'm someone who believes we need to get college for everybody. I believe the more that you have economic attainment, the more power you can generate. Because look, I grew up in a housing project where I was the minority.
Right.
We used to play this neat game called Chase the White Kid and beat his behind. And I'm sure it was a fun game. But, I learned very young that, a lot of it was about green. Black, white, brown. Most of it, in my view, was green because we were all broke.
Right. But I think that the American experience, and when you look statistically, in terms of how the middle class is formed and what we know about what an education does for a person of color compared to a person that isn't a person of color. We know that a white individual who only has a high school diploma and also has a criminal record is more likely to be hired than a black person who has a college degree and no criminal record. So again, in that situation, statistically, what we're finding is that the person, even though that person has obtained an education as a person of color, they are still being discriminated against. And so again, I think that in theory, on paper, it makes a lot of sense. The idea of a rising tide lifts all boats, that makes a lot of sense. But when you don't consider the insidious, internalized bigotries that are happening in our society, that happen when it comes to hiring, that happen when it comes to just reviewing a resume, that the wealth actually has not improved or changed for Black Americans, even when they've gotten education, because they're still not able to break through those barriers that are put there by just basic institutionalized racism.
So how do you change that? I mean, this is, again, what I think Trump does masterfully, and I hate giving him credit, but what I think he does masterfully is he takes something like, like players kneeling during the national anthem, which I would argue, and you can either agree or disagree, is not a very popular position to be taking, which is why it got so much attention. And he takes that and throws it out as red meat to divide us even further. Mm-hmm. How do we then take this and use this moment as, okay, well, now you've seen the, Daniel Snyder, the owner of the Redskins, arm in arm with his players, and you see, the responses from Kraft and all of these other people. How do you use that to move this forward and not just make this about a one weekend of turmoil?
Right. Well, I think that if you sort of step back and you, because I think all these moments are like micro moments, and if we step back and kind of look at it at a macro level, this is like the ebb and flow of progress versus like regression. And so ultimately, this tantrum that Trump and basically like all of the white supremacists that associate with him are having is in response to demographic change. It's in response to the resistance. It's in response to people denouncing white supremacy very vocally. We talked about a couple of months ago, or maybe a couple of weeks ago, about the big rally in Boston after Charlottesville, and how the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth, that, for every hateful thing that is done, on the other side, there's this unity and solidarity that comes in response to it. And so even though, it is tumultuous, again, at the micro level, what is happening, I think, more globally, is that as a society, we are talking about these things. We are discussing these things. Like, yes, taking the knee is controversial, but it's controversial on purpose. The reason why these individuals are doing that is because they want to start a conversation. They want to have a dialogue. They want these issues to be digested publicly. And so having that conversation then ultimately brings about some other, action. Now, again, if it makes the deplorables, act up and they do something, again, that's more violent or, radical, then again, we have an opportunity on the opposite side to answer that and to counter that. And that really is like what happens over time in societies, is that it goes back and forth. And we just have to, use this opportunity on our side, to talk about policy and to talk about how these ideas get into our government and how they actually affect us going forward as a society and what we can do to change that.
What do you say to the person who, and I had this, a couple of times, what do you say to the person who says, look, Rick, this is all distraction. This is Trump doing, what Trump does best, which is to, hey, the shiny thing over here. And we all run to the shiny thing while we find out on Friday that 21 states were targeted for hacking.
Right.
We find out that, the Graham Cassidy bill is being, re-worsened, if you will.
Right.
And, that's where, real policy, real debate, real stuff is, and that this is just a distraction. Or does that minimize, what exactly that you're talking about?
I think that it's, how can discussing the instability be a distraction from the instability?
No, I mean the kneeling part. I mean, because there's part of me that goes, by saying that, because I said, and it's just a question because I don't know the answer. And look, this isn't, I had this come up yesterday on Twitter where someone said, would you kneel? And I said, no, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Because it's not my land. It's not really my fight. I support them. I'm with them, but it's not my position to be there. And I got some direct messages back and forth on both sides. I don't know what the right answer is, and I think a lot of white people like me are supportive. We just don't know what how that looks, because I don't want to co-opt the thing, but I want to be supportive.
Right. But I think ultimately, again, like if we step back, all of this is instability in chief, which is what my basic point is that nothing that we are drawing attention to is a distraction from the fact that everything he's doing is unstable and problematic. I mean, there are so many crises happening at one time, because I feel this way too. I mean, if I talk about a certain thing, I always feel like, well, man, I could be talking about a million other things that are a problem right now. And we have to understand that this is such a chaos that we have to be able to multitask, and that all of these issues are intertwined. And ultimately, if you're talking about white supremacy or you're talking about racism, even if taking a knee or the flag or the national anthem or Confederate statues is not necessarily your lane, the institutionalized racism still permeates all these other elements of society. I mean, if you talk about climate change right now, and you look at Puerto Rico, and you look at what's happening in the Caribbean, and how they're getting no help from this man, and no help from this administration, and so that is again a function of a global lack of empathy, and that lack of empathy, I think, is more pronounced when you're talking about certain marginalized groups. But overall, the lack of empathy is ultimately what's leading them to want to take health care away from 32 million people. It's that sociopathy that just runs through everything. And so I think no matter what element of that dysfunction that you're talking about, ultimately it's still pointing to instability in chief, and it's still pointing to this political party that is wreaking havoc on America knowingly and on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest. I mean, I knew that the Trump administration would be bad.
Right.
And I had said that back in November. Actually, I said it back in April of last year, the year before,
right.
when I said I think he's going to win and it's going to be bad. I didn't, and maybe it's just my crystal ball was off that day, but I didn't imagine this bad.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I always what kind of centers me when I talk about all of this is like Putin knew it would be this bad. Actually, Putin knew the destabilizing effect this would have on America. He understood the strife that America was going through from a social standpoint in the midst of electing its first black president, and what that GOP obstruction looked like for 8 years. Anyone who wants to mess with America has sense enough to know what our weakest points are and what our Achilles heel is.
And race
so
is that Achilles heel.
Right, exactly. And I think that when you look at the cyber attack and you look at Facebook and you look at the way that it was everything, the propaganda, even now that we're seeing in terms of, voter suppression and how people were removed from the rolls, and, race permeates all of this. This idea of, marginalizing people and instituting apartheid, it permeates even the election hacking, even the way that the election, the propaganda worked predominantly on the white electorate, and that propaganda was actually targeted to people based on things that they were likely to, post on Facebook or sentiments that they were likely to respond to. It was that calculated. They were that able to get into the psyche and the mind of the American voters. And so all of these issues that we're talking about, they really are bread and butter issues of our politics. And I think that is why, it is so distressing to see how this was used against us, because it's something that we don't like to talk about, and it's something that we don't like to pay attention to. But now it is being used to basically destroy us.
Right. So what you're arguing is that Putin knows us better than we know ourselves.
He does. He absolutely does. He absolutely does. And I think that we are too busy, denying that this is really a problem that we have. And when you just sort of, again, just look at the science and you look at the statistics and you look at, you cannot come up with this very intricate psychological profile and means of propagandizing people without having a fundamental understanding of the Southern strategy and how people can actually be manipulated based on their internal bigotries and prejudices. And that's how propaganda works. And so, like you said about Trump, I'm not saying that he's a brilliant man by any stretch of the imagination, but what he is most able to do is to viscerally get at people's internal bigotries. And that's exactly what he did when he went to Alabama and he started calling people SOBs, right? I mean, he went to the heart of the Confederacy to call affluent black people uppity. And these are people that more than likely felt like President Obama was uppity. This is a sentiment that he is picking up on, and he's using that to galvanize support for himself in the midst of all of the failings of his presidency, because he knows that will increase his approval rating amongst even just his base. And that's enough to keep him going, and that's enough to keep the media, pretending that he's doing a good job and pretending that he's a competent president and leader.
Pretending.
Exactly.
But here's the thing. I mean, the brilliance, and I've said this before, I think the brilliance of what Trump is able to do is, he watches Fox News. He has a sense of what the outrageable, which is a new word I've just now come up with. What the outrageable, what gets them, what gets them all, all wadded up in the panties. He pushes their buttons, and he knows what, he's good at self-promotion. So he creates an environment where the red meat's out there. You've got the outrageables all fired up, lighting their jackets on fire in protest, and then you've got the other side who are defending, and he's just creating this tension to where we're now fighting each other again.
Right, and then this is magnified by the fact that he has somebody like Manafort, right, who has made an entire career of understanding this form of psychological manipulation. I mean, this is not the first time he's done this in America. It's not the first time he's done it internationally. Nope. He was hired for that specific reason. And when you look at somebody like Steve Bannon and the media apparatus that's attached with Breitbart, that again, these are people who know how to manipulate their audience. They're having no effect on the people who are not susceptible to that propaganda, namely people of color. In terms of swaying us over to that side, it's just making us more waving the red flag and going, "Hey, this is a problem." The Confederates are coming. But again, in terms of the people who kind of want to sit on the fence, like the media tries to do, they're finding themselves in a very difficult position, just like the NFL owners. You know, that they wanted to sit on the fence, I think, for a while and just kind of go both sides, let it play out. But they keep pushing the needle to the extent that more and more people are going to have to take a side.
That's it. And it comes back to that age-old labor question. Which side are you on? Jane, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. It's great to have you back. Look forward to talking to you again next week.
You too. I'm glad you're feeling better. Have a great week.
Thank you so much. As always, our good friend Propane Jane. Quick break. Right back. Stick around to listen to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
A lousy scab, or will you be a man? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Can a photograph bring about social reform? Louis Hine believed it could, and on this day in labor history, the year was 1874. Renowned photographer Louis Hine was born in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Hine studied sociology at the University of Chicago, Columbia University, and New York University. He secured a job teaching at the Ethical Culture School in New York City. Hine used photography in his teachings. He took his students to Ellis Island to photograph some of the thousands of immigrants who arrived each day. In 5 years, they had taken more than 200 photographs. Louis Hine continued to use his camera to capture the lives of the poor and working class. Hine traveled the country taking pictures of children who worked in factories. Since factory owners often refused Hine entry into their factories, he sometimes hid his camera and posed as a fire inspector. His photographs helped prod Congress to take up the problem of child labor in the United States. Hine worked for the Red Cross during World War I, and on his passport, he listed himself as following the occupation of a photographer and investigator. His camera documented the war's devastating impact on French and Belgian citizens. After the war, Hine joined the campaign to establish better safety laws for American workers. In 1930 through 1931, he took photographs documenting the construction of the Empire State Building. He was later employed by the Tennessee Valley Authority to photograph the dam's construction. In addition, he took photos of the Civilian Conservation Corps. These images remain a lasting documentation of the laborers employed by New Deal programs. Louis Hine had difficulty earning enough money from his photography to support himself. His poverty mirrored that of the workers he had photographed. And sadly, in November of 1949, Louis Hine died in poverty. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Looks like crazy Louis Gohmert's at it again. Evidently, Louis said that, John McCain should be recalled. He said nothing inhibits recovery from cancer like stress. Oh, how thoughtful of him. He says, I think Arizona could help him and us. Recall him and let him fight successfully this terrible cancer. And let's get someone in here who will keep the word he gave last year. So let me ask you, if they do recall John McCain, if they do, and let's say they can do it rather quickly before long term, and he loses his job, does he lose his health care? And if he loses his health care, now look, I know John McCain's a rich guy, married very well. He could probably afford to pay the 5 times the amount that they want him to have to pay. Does he get the care that he needs if he doesn't have insurance? Just kind of wondering. Again, think about what these people are trying to do as we speak. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. Our friend Ellen Ratner, Talk Media News. Ellen, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you so much.
So, Cassidy Graham today, huh?
Well, they're trying to sweeten the pie to get Murkowski's vote from Alaska, to get Collins' vote from Maine, and maybe Rand Paul's vote, or perhaps Senator McCain's vote, who I don't think they're going to get. But they are trying to make it so that neither Murkowski or Collins can get reelection, because if they sweeten the pie enough, then they think, then the locals will vote against them. So that's what's going on.
Okay, because at the end of it, I'm looking at this latest scheme, and while we don't know all the details, because look, it's It's large. It's complicated. No CBO score yet, I understand. Maybe today?
Well, I don't know if it's today or not at all. I mean,
yeah,
we
originally
just don't
there
know.
was supposed to be a CBO score today, but they're again, as
well,
you've
there
said.
is going to be a CBO score today, but then they changed the
Right.
bill, so that will not happen.
And
CBO
again, each
stands for Congressional Budget Office.
right, each one seems to be worse than the last one and seems to get less approval than the last one. And I keep, if you're trying to make Murkowski and Collins unelectable, I don't know how you're helping your party by making one piece of legislation worse than the next.
Well, obviously they want this to happen so they can claim it for President Trump and the Republicans doing something. But you're right; they could make it much worse for the party in the midterm.
Yeah. See, here's the thing, and I'll give them a little bit of advice. They should do what the state legislature here in Pennsylvania is trying to do. The big argument here in Pennsylvania is around the gas coming out of the ground, the fracking, the Marcellus Shale. There's an impact fee right now. Everyone says we should have a severance tax like everybody else. So what the Republicans did, said, okay, we're just going to change the name of the impact fee, and we're going to call that a severance tax. Why not just say, change Obamacare to Trump care and fix it and go, see, we won. We repealed the old, and we now have the new.
Well, that would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Well, that would be about policy and what we're seeing about this healthcare
well,
debate.
And, it's very interesting because Haley Barbour, who I am friends with and was the governor of Mississippi during the storm, says that good policy is good politics. But they haven't figured that out yet.
Right. Now, last week I had the week off, and I am now a proud member of the Pre-Existing Conditions Club since I lived through my little health scare. I look at this now from a different lens. And that lens being, the reality is these folks want to make it much more difficult for people like me in my newfound club to get help, to get care in the future. And this should be something that, is just, to me, eye-opening to everyone.
Well, what can I say? By the way, what did they decide with your health scare?
I had a moment of subventricular tachycardia, or supra.
That's your heart.
Yeah, it just meant I had a really fast heartbeat. And they said, hey, maybe it never happens again. Maybe you didn't sleep enough. Maybe, were overstressed, overworked, whatever. And it just, I had a really fast heartbeat. My wife nagged me into going to the doctor, and thank goodness that she did. And they, gave me a shot, and I was better. And they, like they said, may never happen again, but now it's a pre-existing condition.
Wow.
Yeah, so I should live.
Hopefully
it can happen.
Insurance will cover it, right?
I hope. I hope. Let's see. After what we see coming out of this, the hope is that, we get coverage in the future.
Wouldn't that be good?
Yeah.
Well, so we'll see if they are able to get these members of Congress to vote their way.
Right. And they got to the end of the week,
I
right?
think the other issue is, though, the total defunding of Planned Parenthood. And I think that Murkowski and particularly Collins are against that.
Again, I think you're right. I think this is more of a political scheme to hold others, to get them out. It's just, I got to be honest. I look at this with such anger, going, is it not possible to have something about actual policy instead of my team wins and everybody else loses?
I don't know.
Yeah. So did you watch the big football weekend?
I did.
Were you taking a knee?
Yeah, well, something very interesting. Martin Luther King's daughter sent around a 1995 similar kinds of protest that Martin Luther King did in 1995. So, going and the
Well, she did it in 1995, right?
No, I think he did it.
He was dead in 1995.
I'm sorry, 65.
There you go. Okay.
Thank you. But also, it's very interesting that with all of this going on, that there's somehow the NFL put out a ad that they had run during the Super Bowl yesterday, basically saying it's one America.
Yeah, I mean, you
that
look
the
at
lines don't make it whatever.
Yeah, I mean, are you surprised that Trump's taken this on? I mean, this just seems like a dumb fight.
Well, what can we say? He takes on fights he shouldn't take on. If I was his chief of staff, I'd say, we're taking your Twitter away.
Well, you see the picture? Speaking of his chief of staff, did you see the pictures from his UN speech of Kelly?
No, I did not.
He's got his hands in his hands on his face.
Oh, you mean the photograph?
Yeah, the
absolutely.
pictures.
Yes.
Okay, pictures, photographs, same thing. I mean, do you see that? I mean, I think that guy has to be like that every single day.
If I was Kelly, I would be like, how am I going to handle this?
Yeah.
I'd be coming home to my family every day saying, I can't do it anymore.
So let me ask you this on the other side of this, because you look at, and I've been kicking this around about the kneeling protests and Trump taking this on. I mean, Friday we found out that Homeland Security said 21 states were targeted for hacking. That didn't get as much coverage as the kneeling, but I think that's just as important. I mean, you look at the speech from the UN, where basically saying, hey, we're going to start World War III. There's all of this other stuff too. Are you getting any sense that that's any talk of that in your neck of the woods there?
Well, not really.
Not really.
I mean, people are obsessed with other things right now.
Yeah.
And I think that the immigration plan is one that they're pretty obsessed with, as the health care issue. So I think that's where people are really putting their energy today.
Interesting. So any predictions for the week? Because this healthcare thing has to be done by the end of the week, I guess.
It has
or
to
no
be done
reconciliation.
by the end of the week, or it turns into a pumpkin. That's absolutely correct, because it's attached to a funding bill.
Right.
Now, one of McCain's objections was that there were no hearings, so they're having hearings today.
I know you're not one who predicts, but any word from Lilyfield?
Well, it's the same word that I've had, that he's going to be gone either right before the midterms or right after the midterms.
No, I meant on the health care.
Oh, no.
I was
haven't
drilling
asked
down into the...
I haven't asked the dead people about the health care yet.
All right, good. Ellen, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you.
Thank you.
Our good friend Ellen Ratner, Talk Media News Service. Look, at the end of it, I got to be honest. This whole year has been one of those of, watching the outrageable get all fired up and burn stuff and go crazy. And I point to, think about the election, think about Bernie Sanders, enough with the damn emails already, and all of that. And yet we find out over the weekend, and I know this didn't make huge news because we were obsessing over Trump's tweets. We find out that Kushner, Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, and a couple of the others, economic advisor Gary Cohn, a couple of other folks in the administration have been using, wait for it, hold on, private email accounts. They've had their own private email accounts and doing government business on their, wait for it, private email accounts. Now, if you remember the election, all 2016, we were screaming, or some were screaming, lock her up for the emails. How dare she? Yet, I don't see those same people. I don't see them lining up to scream about Kush Baby and Bannon and Reince and Cohn and the rest of them. Have I missed the outrage? Because I haven't missed the hypocrisy. I haven't really missed the irony, although some people are saying irony is now dead. But you look at this and you got to go, where are the outraged? Oh, that's right. They're distracted for now. They're waving the flag. I got to tell you, scary times. And this hyper nationalism, something that I've been concerned about for a long time. Right front and center, smacking us right in the face. And when we come back, we're going to talk with a good friend, Jeff Santos, about his run for city council. Also, as a sports guy, I want to get his thoughts on the weekend's protests, if he'll indulge me. But more I want to talk about, look, we need to get good people into political office, from dog catcher all the way up to president of the United States. Because, look, what we're seeing coming out of Washington, D.C., what we're coming out of state capitals like Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, is just plain nuts. Quick break. Right back.
The cries of war will sound the day we stand before the
radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production.
For WIN, I'm Joanne Powers. Legislation to combat rampant wage theft in California's construction industry passed the state legislature this month with strong majorities in both houses. Assembly Bill 1701 would hold general contractors and their subcontractors jointly liable for unpaid wages, all the way down the line. If signed by Governor Jerry Brown, which seems likely, it will go into effect at the end of the year. Cesar Diaz, legislative and political director of the California State Building and Construction Trades Council, says wage theft by subcontractors is common in the industry nationwide.
We believe that the general contractor does have the authority of the entire work site on a variety of different levels, and so they are responsible for hiring subcontractors that fail to pay their workers. This happens routinely on many private construction job sites. They often turn a blind eye because in the end they know they won't be responsible for that subcontractor's actions. And so this bill changes that behavior.
Diaz says AB 1701 will also help combat the common practice of misclassifying construction workers as independent contractors, denying them a wide array of benefits and worker protections. The state's construction industry spent $5 million fighting the legislation.
They said that if you were to pay workers their properly owed wages, that somehow that would increase construction costs, which I think sent a signal to all of us and a lot of the legislators in the Capitol. They're basically admitting that they're not paying workers what they're properly owed, abusing workers, and none of those savings translated into lower housing costs. They all just translated into more profits for the developers themselves. The legislators were not buying those arguments.
The union representing dining service workers at Grinnell College in Iowa has announced a campaign to expand their reach to all 1,200 student workers on campus. Corey McCartan is president of the Union of Grinnell Student Dining Workers.
We really saw the union working well for student workers in food service and thought it was time to bring those benefits to the rest of campus. There's just no real way for workers collectively to have a say in anything that goes on at work. Wages and hours are set unilaterally. We think it's really important to provide that voice, and we think that unions are the best way to do that.
The union has challenged the university to remain neutral throughout the process.
In the past, they've actually stayed pretty neutral, so we're hopeful and optimistic that this time around they'll take that approach and choose democracy over anti-union tactics like we see at Harvard and Yale. But we're prepared for anything, and we think we have strong support in the student body.
Workers Independent News is America's multimedia voice for workers.
We need to make more money. What they're paying us, the greedy corporations, they just want to pay us what they want to pay us, and it's not right.
Support WIN's news mission at workersindependentnews.com. WIN is made possible in part by the OPEIU, the Office and Professional Employees International Union. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
Standing tall against a multinational corporate agenda. The Rick Smith Show.
Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. For a very long time, I've been saying, look, what we need are average, everyday working people to step forward, step up, stand up, and say, you know what, I'm throwing my hat in the ring. I'm going to run for office. I don't care if it's dog catcher or if you're running for Congress. We need people who, well, identify with their neighbors. For too long, what's happened is we've allowed the political elite to decide who runs and who wins. It's time for average, everyday, you and me, lunch pail, bucket kind of folks to jump in and throw their names into the ring, which is why I've asked my good friend Jeff Santos, who is a talk radio host, much like myself. Also currently a candidate in his local hometown there in Cambridge, Massachusetts, for the city council. Jeff, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks, Rick. Thank you for having me, my friend. How are you?
I am good. So why in God's name are you throwing your name into the middle of all this?
Yeah, people keep asking me that, and I'm like, well, maybe I'm a little bit off the wall. No, seriously, we have been, and you do such a great job in this, getting people to want to be involved in politics. We tell people, and I know I've been saying on my show that, hey, if you want to see change, you want to see Trump change, you want to see Democrats become a team of folks that are, really have some cojones and do things for the middle class and the working class, support labor unions, et cetera, then you're going to have to get involved and get behind those people who are running. Run yourself. So I decided to take my own advice, and I ran. And I'm running. And doing pretty well. We've got about 11 endorsements from labor unions around the region. We've got a lot of people coming in to volunteer. So we're really excited about the opportunity. It's a very unique system here. This is PR, a ranked choice voting. So you pick 9 people. We all run at the same time. There's about 26 people running. So it's a little bit unique compared to the rest of the country. And you have to get these number 1 votes, which count, at a higher rate than the other votes. So it's complicated. But fact is, people do care about the local elections. And I'm hoping to get one of the 9 slots. There are 6 incumbents running for re-election and 3 open seats. So hopefully I can get one of those.
Yeah. Well, I would argue, Jeff, if you want to change the world, you start by changing your little corner of it. And local politics, to me, are always the most personal because, look, they're the ones that affect you the most. And while, the president or Senate or, Congress may seem like big, sexy races, they don't affect your life every day. It's that local race, things like you're running for city council, that affects your life intimately daily.
No doubt, and one of the things that I have found, and it's part of my part of the issues that I talk about all the time, is something as simple as parking. You have a city here. There's not a lot of land. There's not a lot of space. It's adjacent to Boston. It's an old city. So you get old streets that are not wide and boulevards like, say, California. So parking is an issue. It's an issue for people who are resident parkers here. Whether they go to school or work full-time. And at the same time, small businesses, which is a big, big part of what I'm hearing, is that so much has happened. This is going across the country, not just here in Cambridge or greater Boston, is that the old towns, the main streets, those things are unfortunately falling apart. And as a friend of mine in New York said, if what continues is, Michael Kors and Neiman Marcus going into all these places here at Target in Central Square, Cambridge, what's going to end up happening is you lose that foundation. And he says, Steve Rosenthal, who runs a recording studio, that, New York will become nothing more than condos, co-ops, and corporations. And if that's the case, who the heck wants to go to New York for anything?
Yeah.
So I feel the same way about Cambridge. And every little bit that helps that small businesses stay in the place they've been there for 30 or 40 years. There's a place closing that's been around since 1929. It sells curtains and blinds and a bunch of other things. Rent's too damn high. Therefore, they have to close up shop after being there for 70 years. So it's just to a point now where we're at a point that if people don't stand up and get involved, then they're going to see their next door neighbor, whether it's a business or a renter or an owner of a house in some cases, basically leave because they can't afford to stay. They can't afford the property taxes. It's a whole slew of things. And it goes right back to the economic inequality that Bernie Sanders talked about, that you and I talk about, that's going on across the country, regardless of what coast you're on or what time zone.
Yeah, so Jimmy McMillan was kind of the foreseer of what's happening. The rent's too damn high.
That's right. Jimmy, I would love to have him on the show because I think he makes the point as good as anybody. Yeah, it's true though. I mean, we got a situation here where the average single-family home is $1.2 million. Average. The average condo is $600,000. So how does a middle-class person, how does a working-class person, even consider living here? So what ends up happening is it becomes, the lifestyles of the rich and famous on one side, and people just scrambling for everything else. Now there is a good affordable housing policy that goes above, say, the $20,000 and $30,000 a year limit, which is the case in most places, and there's 20% of all new buildings have to do affordable housing. But still, if you want to buy, and a lot of people, I mean, they may not necessarily have any kids, or they may have one child, and they can live in a condo because there's no way they're going to be able to afford the $1.2 million for a single-family home. So what I'm proposing is a rent-to-own perspective. But what you basically do is that, and we're using some new plans coming in from MIT to do this, where if you qualify for, say, a $2,500 a month, I know this sounds crazy to people outside of the coast, but that's about what a one-bedroom goes for here. And if you can afford that, you get your credit, you're a good tenant for the first year, you pay your rent on time and so forth, then you should be able to own that unit and pay the rent money toward your mortgage. So that does a couple of things. A, it's a solid tenant for the developer. Number two, it pays property taxes into the city of Cambridge, which is always good. And third, it begins this discussion of getting people who are of middle-class background, make somewhere between, say, $60,000 and $100,000 a year, and that's a middle class in Cambridge. That's an opportunity, in my view, to be able to get people of modest incomes into the city and to stay. Otherwise, they end up moving to Hampshire.
Yeah. Well, what do you say to the person then, in thinking about that plan, who says you're creating another bubble?
Well, I mean, the fact is that the only way you're going to be able, to put people in Cambridge who can't afford to own is you're going to have to create this set aside, if you might. There's no other way around it.
So, the other side of that is there are some who, and again, I'm not a school that I subscribe to, but there are some who say, well, if you can't afford to live in the neighborhood, Jeff, you shouldn't be here.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've had this discussion with other people about this. It's like, well, go live somewhere else. But if that's the case, then we can keep doing this everywhere. I mean, Cambridge doesn't have the whole purpose of doing this exclusively. This is happening in a whole bunch of places. So where are you going to end up living? On the edge of Guam? I mean, because it's happening in a nearby city of Somerville, which is a working class city, for many years. Well, the rent is too damn high there. It's hard to buy there as well. So they're going to the next town. And they can keep going and going and going unless somebody puts a halt to it.
Yep. No, and this is the reason I bring this up is, look, we've got really mass inequality. It's growing faster and faster by the day, as you see, article after article in Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal even saying, look, inequality is a problem. Wages haven't gone up. And, as you point out, look, a community like yours, a working class person is struggling to live in there. And, how do you, as a society, as policymakers, help bring this country back together with all of its divisions? And I think economically, that's where it has to begin.
It does. And look, the fact is we've had 40 years, and we understand this better than most because we've been on the other side of being progressive, being a populist Democrat and talk show host, is that the right wing has made a very simple plea. Government sucks over the last 40 years. And that's what they do. And they do it every day. And when you do that, then people look at government and they say, well, I don't want them involved. We want to get everything away. And then when people want to privatize, as they're doing here to the great subway system we have, the MBTA, the oldest one in the country, it basically, we have a scenario where the trains are, run by a government. But the fact is that the governor, Republican Baker, wants to privatize it. He's already done it with the repairs that have been some of the best repairs in the country to save a couple of dollars. He's trying to do it in other ways. In the meantime, the Red Line, which is the line that goes through Cambridge, we have 6 stops on the MBTA. It takes 20 minutes to get from, where it's a 4-minute drive because the trains are too old. They're 50-year-old trains that should have been out of existence in the late 80s. But we've had successive Republican governors and one Democrat, tragically enough, in Deval Patrick, that really has put this to the side. Or in some cases, Mitt Romney said, to heck with it. We don't need it, public transportation. So all these things add up to this idea that government can do no good. It all sucks. It's all bad. And anytime somebody wants to use a tax or do something that helps people, they say, oh, well, you're a communist or you're for government. And government has shown over the years it doesn't do any good. Of course, they never talk about Medicare. They never talk about the military. They never talk about the VA, all these things that people like, but all government. But this is the mantra, and I think Democrats have to stand up, progressives have to stand up and say, look, government can work. It's the only way a democracy can work. We see it with single-payer health care across Europe. We see it with education that's basically free. In some places, they even pay you to go to college in Europe. I mean, these are things that have to be done. But if Democrats don't get out there and start saying, this is what needs to be done, this is what we need unions. You know, when people get together collectively, then, you know, things get done. We've seen that historically in this country.
Yeah, and the mantra should be Republican government doesn't work because, you know, as you've pointed out, what's happened is we've had the years of disinvestment and years of not doing anything, and then they turn around and go, well, see, we told you it didn't work.
Right, exactly. See, you know, we just basically hollowed out the entire government, but, you know, it just goes to show you it doesn't work. You know, it's laughable, but it's serious because it affects people every day, as you know. And, you know, you do a great job educating a lot of people, Rick, throughout the country. And, you know, there are people who are frustrated, you know, that they don't see their lives improving. I mean, that's part of the reason we saw Donald Trump do well in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan and so forth. You know, when Hillary Clinton doesn't go to these states, when they don't talk about how effective TPP and trade deals have hollowed out that part of the country. You know, I took a train from Boston to Chicago, going through some places that have just been completely destroyed. Erie, PA, not too far from where you are. Places like Cleveland, where I know you spend a lot of time. I mean, there's a train station in Cleveland. Listen to this. You can't take a train in the normal hours. If you want to go west, I believe it's 3 a.m. You can get in a shack in Cleveland outside of the football stadium, and then you can take a 4 a.m. train going east to Boston. This is crazy. I mean, you know, what country in Europe or in other parts of the world have trains that leave major cities like Cleveland at 3 a.m. and 4 a.m.? It's insane, but that's what goes on.
Yeah, but here again, we've got this view in this country that public transportation is only for those people, Jeff.
Right.
It's not for us good people.
Right. Those people.
No, I mean, isn't that what it is? Look, I mean, where I live, there was a talk of putting, and this is again why city council positions are so important and local government so important. You had them saying, look, we're not going to have a light rail line to get to Harrisburg because, you know, we might get the wrong elements coming into our sleepy little hamlet.
Yes, exactly. The wrong elements, which mainly is black people.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's to get down to it. And a little bit Latino, and if you want to throw, you know, another group that's been discriminated against, you know, Muslim Americans, so on and so on. You can, you know, basically pinpoint it. I mean, it's the Trump thing. This whole NFL thing, you know, goes right to it as well. I mean, you know, if 74% of the NFL players weren't black, then I don't think we'd be having this issue. 75% of the NBA players, you know, are African Americans. So, I mean, this is what it is. And, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, how long must we sing this song of hate and divisiveness that Trump is doing? You know, he's been able to bamboozle and fool enough people. And, you know, a lot of people who felt that, well, nobody in the Democratic Party was listening to me, a white 45-year-old guy who's looking for another job because the other one just got laid off or got sent off to India or to the Far East, then, you know, then you go for Trump. But I think people realize now that the guy's a buffoon and he's mean-spirited on top of it all.
I hope they realize. I got to be honest. I hope because I looked at that speech from Alabama and there were some interesting folk there.
There were, and there are going to be people that will follow him all the way to his grave. But the fact is that, you know, I think it's becoming less and less. And I think if you get away from his core support, which is in the rural pockets of this country, and if you get further away from the South, in the deep South, Alabama is right there. I think you're going to see people start taking a second look. I really believe that there was a poll today in those other states. I think if they were to, the question was to be asked, you know, do you feel that Donald Trump has helped you in the 8 months or 9 months that he has been president? I think the people would say he has not, because what has he done?
Yeah, I would also think that the core base would say it's because the Democrats won't let him. And you go, but the Democrats aren't in control.
Right.
But again, facts and reality completely aside. I do want to get back to your race real quick, though.
Yeah.
Running for city council, the website, santosforcitycouncil.com. We'll
Correct.
get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Throw you a couple of bucks because, look, we need good working class folks to run, to be elected, to push for policies that are sane, rational, and helpful. When's the election? What can people do to help? Thoughts?
Well, thank you, Rick. Thank you again for giving me the platform. And it's important to get people to support also what you do every day. And Rick has been one of the folks that understands the average plight of the worker, understands what labor unions mean, and he and I have had numerous discussions on this and how progressives need to come together with a pro-labor message to push across winning races around this country, particularly in the Midwest. People can go to santosforcitycouncil.com. Look, folks, I'll accept anything, $10, $20, whatever you can give. The limit here in the state is up to 1,000. If you have friends that live in Cambridge, please tell them to go to the website to volunteer, santosforcitycouncil.com. We're also on Facebook and Twitter as well. Santos #4 Council on Twitter. But we appreciate your help in whatever you can do. We're trying to do what not only people from Bernie Sanders and labor leaders around this country have talked about, from Mr. Trump on down. We need to have a better America. We need more people employed. We need more people, having a consistent job where they can raise families and they can send their kids to college and so forth. And the American dream can still be there for everybody. I'm hoping to be one of the people that actually tries to do that on a local level, and hopefully with the help of people that are listening to this show, we can make it happen.
Good stuff, Jeff. I wish you nothing but the best. Folks, check out santosforcitycouncil.com. Throw them a couple of bucks if you live, like you said, if you live in the area. Vote. Jeff, I appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you very much. All the best.
Always great talking with my good friend Jeff Santos. Let's take a quick break. Right back. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1961. That was the day when Herbert Lee was murdered just outside of Liberty, Mississippi. He was a successful black cotton farmer who became active in efforts to register black voters. Lee had 9 children. He was one of the few area black farmers with a vehicle. This made him very valuable to the voter registration movement. Lee would drive Bob Moses from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee around Amet County to reach unregistered voters. It was dangerous work to register black sharecroppers and farmers in rural Mississippi. Attempts by black residents to gain legal or economic equality were met with threats and violence. On the morning of his murder, Lee had come to the Westbrook Cotton Gin just outside of Liberty to drop off a truckload of cotton. There, he was met by a childhood friend, Mississippi State Representative E.H. Hurst. Hurst came up to the truck and started shouting at Lee. Then he took out a gun and shot Herbert Lee in the head. Witnesses stated that Lee had brandished a tire iron at Hurst. Hurst claimed self-defense. A jury declared the murder was justifiable homicide. Lewis Allen, a black farmer and timber worker, was one who had testified about witnessing the shooting. Later, he recanted his testimony, saying that he had lied about Lee threatening Hurst because he feared for his life. After Allen began to talk about what he actually saw that day, he became the victim of harassment and beatings. Finally, on January 31st, 1964, he too was gunned down in his driveway. No one was ever convicted or even arrested for his murder. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Your proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. Bloomberg had an interesting story over the weekend titled Why Wages Aren't Growing. And look, the guy could have just listened to the show. He goes through basically everything I've been talking about for years. And the one part that got me, he points out that employees working 9 to 5 have simply not benefited as they should have from improvements in economic performance or corporate profitability. Quote, without fatter paychecks, the average household cannot spend more, and that's bad for growth. Yes, it's really that simple. And it is that simple. And I've been saying this for years. While the distribution of the quote-unquote pie keeps going to the handful, the rest of us are fighting over crumbs. And they point out that, look, people are better off than they were in 2008 after the collapse. We don't have the same anxiety that we had back then. Wages have ticked up a little bit. They're claiming about 3.4% just in 2016 when you adjust for inflation and do all that economic gimmickry stuff. But as the authors of this point out, what I've been saying for years, it's not because wages went up. When household income goes up, you do what you do in my household when the wages aren't going up. You work more hours. And that's exactly what's going on here. The same report said that, hey, had people not worked more, wouldn't have gone up. What does that mean in really simplistic Trump supporter kind of terms? You're simply working more for less. You're working longer hours, working harder, and not benefiting from it. They point out that there was an April study backed by the International Monetary Fund that concluded, look, the share of national income that's being paid to working people has been falling since the 1980s. And you go, hold on, what happened in 1980? What? Oh, yeah, supply-side voodoo Reaganomics. Tax cuts. Yeah. Tax cuts for the wealthy. And we went on this fetish tour of no rich person left behind. Because as Michelle Bachmann said, we're running out of rich people. So we've got to create more of them. And the reality is wages have not kept up with productivity gains. Hasn't happened. And I generally show that little chart. There's a little graph, and it's brilliant, where productivity has gone from the end of World War II at like a 45-degree angle right across the graph. Wages kept up with productivity right around the middle 1970s and then stopped. Productivity kept going up. Wages not just deadlined, but actually declined. Now, they're saying, well, Rick, it's automation, and automation plays a part of this. But Rick, it's globalization. Yep, plays a part of this. Absolutely. What it has really been, though, is the destroying of labor unions, the destroying of people's ability to fight for better wages, hours, and conditions, and also the ability to have a strong labor movement that engages in, yes, politics. Because had labor been as strong as they were, in the 1970s, do you think the Democratic Party would have forgotten them? Because part of Hillary's loss and part of the loss of the Democrats across this country is they're basically not just turning their back on labor, but forgetting that they exist altogether. This is a huge problem. And again, part of the solution that I think even economists today who have been spouting the wonders of free trade and all of neoliberalism and all of that, the fact that unions are struggling, that's the reason that CEOs in this country average, about $16 million a year, or 271 times the average worker, whereas in the 1960s, 1965, when union density was at its highest, about 35%, the CEO only made 20 times as much. Again, you keep coming back to this and back to this. The reality is working people have lost their voice. They've lost their ability to fight for better wages, hours, conditions, to fight for their share of the pie or policy that benefits them. And this healthcare debate is front and center in that as well. At some point, and look, the article goes into, well, you know what we need to do is we need to get job training for all these people. And I agree on a certain level. I agree. When all the truck drivers are going to lose their jobs because we're going to mechanize them and they're all going to be run by computers, what do those truck drivers do? Well, we're going to send them back to school. Like, okay, what are we going to send them back to? We're going to teach them computers. And you think that these folks are going to be able to compete with 18-year-olds going to college? Look, I'm all in favor of job training and apprenticeship programs, but from a policy standpoint, you better figure out how we deal with this. And look, we're not talking about any of this stuff. We're talking about taking a knee. That's what the era of Trump and the Republican Party has done to us. It's crazy. Just flat crazy. Anyway, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Doug Cunningham, Workers Independent News, going to be here to share some of his thoughts on the labor news of the day. Quick break. Right back.
Own 90% of the wealth, 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
Some areas could be without power for 4 to 6 months.
Hurricane Maria devastates Puerto Rico.
The nation's president warned every minute counts to save lives.
Hundreds dead in second Mexico earthquake in 2 weeks. California cities sue the fossil fuel industry for climate change damages. Plus,
we must move forward. We must continue advancing because climate change is not stopping.
French President Emmanuel Macron takes the lead, rallying the United Nations on climate action.
All of those rallies and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
I've never seen winds like this in Puerto Rico. You take a look at what's happening there, and it's just one after another.
I know. Who could have predicted it, Mr. President? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, the deadly hurricane season continues to continue.
Yes, it does. In the Caribbean, Hurricane Maria made a direct hit on Puerto Rico as a powerful Category 4 on Wednesday, the strongest storm to hit the U.S. island territory since 1932.
And the third strongest storm to ever hit the U.S.
It caused extensive flooding and knocked out power to 100% of the island's electric grid. The mayor of San Juan said infrastructure and electrical grid repairs could take 4 to 6 months. Puerto Rico is already grappling with a deep financial crisis and faces more than $1 billion in damages from Hurricane Irma alone. The economies of all of these Caribbean island nations hit by Irma and Maria are reliant on tourism, and full recovery will take years.
Well, no worries. I'm sure the Republicans in Congress will be happy to send disaster aid to the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico.
The Washington Post reports that 2017 has already had more than a year's worth of named storms based on the long-term average, and we are only midway through hurricane season. What's remarkable about the Atlantic hurricanes of 2017 is both their intensity and how rapidly they're intensifying, getting really bad really fast. According to the acting deputy director of the National Hurricane Center, 2017 has seen more frequent rapid intensification events than usual. Hurricane Maria may also have set a record for rapid intensification for an Atlantic storm. Meanwhile, a second powerful earthquake in 2 weeks rocked central Mexico as a 7.1. That followed an even larger 8.1 quake that hit the nation's west coast. Tuesday's earthquake has killed more than 200 people, mostly in collapsed buildings, with the death toll expected to rise. Now, there's a common thread here in the impact of these disasters, and that's why we focus on infrastructure and building codes. codes, because building codes and well-designed, resilient infrastructure can mark the difference between life and death, both during and in the dangerous aftermath of a disaster. Both play a crucial role in every community's ability to recover from future disasters, including the accelerating impacts of climate change.
This latest earthquake hit on the 32nd anniversary of the 1985 earthquake that killed some 10,000 people in Mexico City. And while the death toll for this latest one is expected to rise to as many as 1,000, it could be the building codes that have changed since 1985 that ended up saving a lot of lives.
And not speaking of climate change was U.S. President Donald Trump. In his first ever address to the United Nations General Assembly this week in New York, Trump had plenty to say about rogue nations that put the rest of the world at risk, but nothing about the growing threat of climate change. However, French President Emmanuel Macron, in his first address to the United Nations, subtly criticized Trump's decision to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement. He said that voluntary agreement is not negotiable.
Humankind must defend itself by protecting itself. That agreement is not up for renegotiation. We will not backtrack. We will continue to implement the Paris Agreement.
Macron is allocating 5 billion euros for climate action in France, and he called on cities and states around the world to do their part in transitioning away from fossil fuels. To that end, California Governor Jerry Brown, at the Climate Week Side Conference in New York, announced that the U.S. Climate Alliance, a coalition of 15 states, including New York and California, is on track to cut their carbon emissions 25% by 2025. Brown encouraged other nations to hold fast to their commitments, saying, quote, other countries ought to listen. The U.S. is in all the way on the Paris Accord.
Just not our president, but let's not mention that.
Finally, on Wednesday, San Francisco and Oakland, California, became the first major U.S. cities to sue the fossil fuel industry over climate change. Their suit alleges that oil, gas, and coal producers not only caused the greenhouse gas emissions driving rising sea levels, but did so knowingly. And it seeks to hold the industry accountable for billions of dollars in property damages caused by rising seas now and in the future from flooding and coastal erosion.
We sure are counting on the judiciary to save this country and this world a whole lot of late, aren't we?
I'll take what we can get.
Indeed. For much more on all of those stories and many that we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
The more you ignore me, the closer I get. You're wasting your time. Now the lessons of the past were all learned with workers' blood. The mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities to the farmlands and trenches full of mud. 'Cause war has always been the boss's way, sir. Come on! The union forever defending our rights. Let's fight the right wing, all workers unite.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Yesterday, you saw Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, while not taking a government flight somewhere to go see, I don't know, the eclipse or honeymoon or, none of that stuff. While he's not doing that, he was out saying, look, you NFL players, you ungrateful, the ungratefuls, you can do free speech on your own time. When you're on the boss's dime, you should be fired. That's what he is saying Trump's position was. And it got me thinking about at-will employment. Look, in this country, if you're an employee without a contract, which the NFL players do have a contract, you could be fired for any reason. Any reason being, hey, you didn't have your hand over your heart. You weren't standing tall enough. You weren't singing. You can be fired for any of that stuff. Welcome to America. Anyway, here to talk about the weekend's events and all of the stories in labor, our good friend Doug Cunningham, Workers Independent News. Doug, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, always, man. Good to be with you.
So did you get the same kind of vibe from Mnuchin's comments that, look, these are at-will employees. These are your employees. You're the boss. You're the master. Come down on these people.
Yeah, this is a plantation mentality for sure. I mean, Trump calling the NFL players who protest during the national anthem, which is their right as Americans, by the way, under the Bill of Rights, but Trump making a speech in Alabama to a mostly white audience, redneck, plantation mentality when he called out these NFL protesters as sons of bitches who should be fired. So as repulsive as Mnuchin's comments are about working people and at-will employment being fired for not stepping and fetching for the boss, as repulsive as that is, it's even more repulsive to me that somebody who claims to be the President of the United States isn't defending the Bill of Rights. And you'll notice, Rick, that this guy, this fecal stain in the White House, has not said the same thing about racist Nazis. Never called them sons of bitches.
Nope.
Who should be removed from a field, right? But he's attacking these NFL players for simply exercising their rights. And I was just amazed at what happened on Sunday with all these players joining together.
Not just the players, Doug. I mean, there were owners out there. I saw the Redskins owners out there.
Yeah, 250 players plus, and coaches and execs, all taking a stand together and uniting and stepping up. And this is fantastic to see, because the real issue here is not some mindless conformity to an empty ritual that means nothing. It's actually living and breathing your patriotism, really caring about the issues that face this country and stepping up and exercising your constitutional right to speak out on it. Yes, to protest, your right to free speech. Remember that this is the same so-called president who called the press the enemy of the people while justifying the Nazis as, oh, there are some good people on that side too.
No, very fine people.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't know if anybody caught this, but 90 years ago, on Memorial Day, 90 years ago, Trump's father was actually arrested at a Ku Klux Klan rally in New York, taken to the police station where he was ultimately released, let go. But that happened, folks. I'm not saying he was a Klan member, but clearly I think this president has issues with race and with social justice issues.
As my mother said, you are judged by who you associate with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell you what, I got to drill this home one more time for NFL fans that might be listening to this and who may be upset or perturbed that some of these players are taking knees during the national anthem, okay? Look, real patriotism is exercising your rights as an American to protest,
yes,
to speak out freely, all right? And that's what these folks are doing. And by the way, these NFL players, of course, are in a union. And the NFL Players Association is saying that they will never, ever back down, and that they will continue to support the players who are standing up as Americans and exercising their Bill of Rights.
But here's the thing: as unpopular as it may have been, and look, I would be one who would be standing because one, I argue that it's not my lane to be in. This is their protest. Trump magnifying this has just now taken what was a handful of people and magnified it into where now it's something that we as a country now have to debate and have to fight over.
You have to fight over it because it's a defense of the core values of this country.
Agreed.
And that's the point. And I know I sound repetitive maybe in saying this repeatedly here on the show today, but that's what's important about this, okay? And the fact that these players, whether you agree with them or not, nobody should be ostracized or fired for speaking up and exercising their free speech rights. And that's exactly what these players are doing. They're speaking up. And that's why you saw so much solidarity. It's not everybody who participated in those protests and those signs of solidarity at those NFL games Sunday. Not everybody supported these players taking a knee during the national anthem, that particular act that they were doing. But they support their right to do it. And that's what's key here, and that's what's central. And also, I mean, I heard somebody, some talking head on TV today, making the argument that when the president does this kind of stuff, the so-called president does this kind of stuff, he's trying to play to what he thinks is a majority of people out in the country, and he wants to divide people and get players to so-called take the bait, to go ahead and protest because he supposedly knows the majority of Americans are with him. Well, look, we're in a lot of trouble in this country if the majority of Americans can't get behind free speech.
No, I'm with you on that. But, here's the thing. I mean, for me, I've been saying for a long time, all of these fake shows of patriotism, they're just repetitive behaviors. Again, I don't know. As Bob Costas pointed out this morning on CNN, why is it that we've got the national anthem before the football games? We don't have it before the movies or before going to a play or doing anything else. Why is it there? Why is it that we have all of this? And I would argue a lot of this show of patriotism, well funded by military organizations. Why is it that every seventh inning stretch you've got we thank this military person, but we don't have teachers or any other profession?
Yeah, thank some reporters for your freedoms. Thank the Watergate reporters for exposing a corrupt president that was subverting the Constitution. And look, I'm a patriot. I'm a real patriot. I believe in the Bill of Rights and our Constitution and our rights as Americans, and I really believe in those rights and exercising those rights. And that's what this is all about. I mean, some mindless conformity about saluting a flag. Nobody ever died for a flag. They died for what that flag is supposed to represent, and that's the freedom that we have. The consent of the governed in America, not some bully boy trying to get you fired or get trolls to come down on your head for standing up for your rights as an American. So, I mean, this is ridiculous, and right on to the NFL brothers and sisters out there in that organization, and right on to the owners that are supporting these players, because that's what we need to do. We need to be united in this country.
Absolutely, good on them. Let's find out what else is going on in the world of labor. What do you got for me this week?
Well, let's see. A big victory in Tennessee, actually. Electrolux workers in Tennessee, of all places, right-to-work states, Southern, very anti-union, et cetera. The IBEW, Local 474, was organizing the Swedish home appliance giant, Electrolux. And they spent 9 months organizing. They had some help from the Swedish union, IF Metall. And they won, and it was an environment in the South that's traditionally hostile to unions. So hats off to the IBEW for winning that organizing drive there. And I always like to make sure that people know about victories, And earlier this summer, Boston College had a victory up north at the university there. And in California, Rick, there's a wage theft bill now that has been passed, an anti-wage theft bill, of course. And it's aimed at the construction industry out there. Wage theft in this country is a huge problem. That bill has been passed by the California legislature and is awaiting Governor Jerry Brown's signature. This is my first day back from vacation. I don't believe that the governor has signed it yet, but it's on his desk waiting to be signed. So a couple of good steps forward for labor, one in California and one in Tennessee, in that organizing victory. So a step back, unfortunately, though, in Michigan.
No, I mean, you saw the last reports I saw that, and this is a staggering number, but that wage theft in this country costs every year working people in the range of $50 billion a year. I mean, stop and think about that for a minute. $50 billion out of the pockets of working people that could be spent at the local convenience store, at the local movies, at the local restaurant, at the local whatever. That's money that could be spent creating jobs it's not.
And that wage theft takes so many different forms. I mean, it's not complying with overtime laws. It's not complying with minimum wage laws. It's not complying sometimes with paying workers for what they have to do to get ready for work. And in California, this particular bill, Assembly Bill 1701, would hold general contractors in the construction industry and their subcontractors jointly liable for unpaid wages. What often happens in the construction trades, as you probably well know, is that a general contractor might be responsible for the job. Subcontractors, though, are hired. They in turn hire workers, and sometimes those workers get stiffed by the subcontractors. And unscrupulous contractors will go, sort of shrug their shoulders. That's a subcontractor that did that to you, not me. Well, this law gets around that and makes sure that there's joint responsibility for that.
Now, I would argue wage theft, as you say, comes in a number of forms. I would argue misclassifying workers as independent contractors as opposed to employees is a huge part of that. Any language in this bill that would cover that?
I don't know this. I haven't read the bill specifically, so I don't know about that. But it does say that it will help on that issue. I'm not sure right now. I'm not clear about exactly how it helps in California. Cesar Diaz, who is the political director of the California State Building and Construction Trades Council, says it will help combat the common practice of misclassifying construction workers as independent contractors. So I'll have to take the word on that of a person who should know, is in a position to know. I just haven't read the entire bill.
I mean, you stop and you think about that number, $50 billion stolen.
It's amazing, and it's enormous. And it's not only for the working people that this is important, right? I mean, it's for the general economy. $50 billion taken out of the pockets of working people and not circulating in the economy, all right? And we all know that when we put money in workers' pockets, that's the best way to get the economy going and to support the economy, because workers spend that money pretty quickly, and they put it into the economy, and then that in turn generates multipliers of effects throughout the economy to help everybody. I mean, down to Main Street businesses that depend on this kind of business, this kind of trade, the income, and workers having money in their pockets to be able to spend. So this is not only immoral, but it's damaging to our nation's economy and our economic health that this continues. So hats off. I really applaud California's lawmakers for doing that. And once again, I want to underscore this. If you have a government that cares and gives a damn about working people and cares about justice, social, economic justice issues for working people, then they will pass laws that are good for working people and quit attacking them repeatedly like we've seen all over the country. And Republicans in particular are guilty of this all over the country, attacking working people and working people's rights. It's just happened in Michigan again.
I'm with you, but here's my thought on it. And while this is, in my view, a good and necessary piece of legislation, I've always been of the mindset, how about we stop the wage theft before it happens? And look, I was, the mass of my working life, I was a union member, carried a Teamsters union card for, more than 20 years working in the freight industry. Never did I lose a digit, let alone hours and hours. Never did I lose a dime of money that I was owed right from the start. It wasn't a matter of, I got to go back and get it. I just didn't get cheated from the beginning. I would love to see every working person have the ability not to be cheated. And I don't think that's too much to ask for.
Amen. It's not too much to ask for, and the only way you can have that right not to be cheated is to have the power to make damn sure you're not cheated. And the power comes from organizing unions, and it comes from collective bargaining agreements, and it comes from worker diligence on the shop floor and wherever else you may be working, in an office or wherever. That's what it takes. It takes organization, it takes contractual protections, and it takes worker diligence at the grassroots level to make sure that contract is complied with. And look, every CEO in America has a contract. Why shouldn't workers have?
I'm right there with you. For me, I wish American workers were as diligent, as angry, as engaged, as informed as, our friends in France. I mean, you want to change labor laws in France? You want to screw working people there? Hundreds of thousands of people in the streets.
That's right. Hundreds of thousands in the streets, and it ain't over yet, and it's going to continue throughout this week and beyond. Workers in France have a labor code, their national labor code, and one of the things that the labor code says is you can't bust them up and break them into small little sectors and small little companies and individual little contract undermining efforts that happens all over the country when employers are free to do that. They go by sector, and that's one of the big reasons those hundreds of thousands of people have turned out in France to protest this, is because this would overturn the French labor code that's been in effect since the 19th century that protects workers against these kind of abuses, right? And that collective bargaining in an entire sector helps to support and protect not only the workers, but the employers. It protects employers from fly-by-night race to the bottom companies that want to undercut these standards and undercut the standards of living for workers. And so hats off to the French, and I hope that the French workers win this struggle and fight back and protect that labor code, because Macron basically wants to take France in the same direction as the United States has gone, and that's been disastrous, as our friends north of the border in Canada can attest, as they try at the NAFTA table to uphold labor standards by defending collective bargaining.
Lots of work to do. Doug, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you.
Great talking with you too, man, and anytime you want me, I'll be there, Rick. Thanks so much.
I appreciate it. Our good friend Doug Cunningham, Workers Independent News. You want to check out their website. LaborRadio.org is the website. Quick break, right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show. For working people, on the talk.
People are through. Me and my people are ready. Me and my people are just about due. I'm a massive airstrike on a beautiful night. Yeah, it's my song I'm singing. Somebody better start counting. We're coming out swinging.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Can a photograph bring about social reform? Louis Hine believed it could, and on this day in labor history, the year was 1874. Renowned photographer Louis Hine was born in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Hine studied sociology at the University of Chicago, Columbia University, and New York University. He secured a job teaching at the Ethical Culture School in New York City. Hine used photography in his teachings. He took his students to Ellis Island to photograph some of the thousands of immigrants who arrived each day. In 5 years, they had taken more than 200 photographs. Louis Hine continued to use his camera to capture the lives of the poor and working class. Hine traveled the country taking pictures of children who worked in factories. Since factory owners often refused Hine entry into their factories, he sometimes hid his camera and posed as a fire inspector. His photographs helped prod Congress to take up the problem of child labor in the United States. Hine worked for the Red Cross during World War I, and on his passport, he listed himself as following the occupation of a photographer and investigator. His camera documented the war's devastating impact on French and Belgian citizens. After the war, Hine joined the campaign to establish better safety laws for American workers. In 1930 through 1931, he took photographs documenting the construction of the Empire State Building. He was later employed by the Tennessee Valley Authority to photograph the dam's construction. In addition, he took photos of the Civilian Conservation Corps. These images remain a lasting documentation of the laborers employed by New Deal programs. Louis Hine had difficulty earning enough money from his photography to support himself. His poverty mirrored that of the workers he had photographed. And sadly, in November of 1949, Louis Hine died in poverty. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
So the big news out this morning, evidently Anthony Weiner back in the news, sentenced to 21 months in the sexting case. He will spend the rest of his life on the registered sex offenders list. Again, you know, you can't go sending pictures of your little guy to 15-year-old girls. Not a good idea. And you would think a congressman would know better than that. Jeez. So there you go. 21 months in jail, where I'm sure he will. Never mind. I'm not going there. Not doing it. All right. Also, Tom Tillis. Senator Tom Tillis is going to introduce the Conservative Dream Act. Yes, conservatives have dreams too. No, evidently they're figuring out how to dig Trump out of the DACA disaster. Their idea is it's going to be a long, arduous process with tons of extreme vetting. And I'm sure some anal probing as well. They point out that all applicants are going to have to pass a medical exam, which you go, does this mean if you're sick, you go? Is this like Ellis Island, where when we took the kids to Ellis Island, they showed us this weird little hook that they would stick in your eye and, you know, basically almost rip your eyelid off? It was excruciatingly painful, looking for some, I forget what the disease was, but if you had it, out you went. Is that what's coming? Sorry, you've got a lisp to the door. Also, the extreme vetting. There will be 3 separate rounds of security and background checks. Got to make sure you have no criminal record, which we know that, you know, this group commits crimes at a much lower rate than natural-born citizens, and that they pose no security risk, which I would argue you already did through the DACA, since you already did this. People came out of the shadows. There was a background check done on them, and it was what it was. Thought we already did that. How is this different? Well, this is different in that it's going to be, the second check will be 5 years. The third check will be 15 years, and that's your path to citizenship. So go through the extreme vetting now, again in 5 years, and then 15 years, or And my thought is, what happens if you don't become a citizen after 15 years? Do they then throw you out? There you go. But the conservative DREAM Act. Sad stuff. If you missed any of today's program, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you did here. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or get the podcast there at the website, thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. Great to be back. Look forward to tomorrow. Thanks again. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.